Welcome to This Humean Life. I am your host, Sam Cookithus. This Humean Life explores what it is to be human, identity, language, and the plasticity of ideas. It embraces making the unfamiliar familiar. The episodes move between the somber and the playful because life is filled with moments of both. It embraces uncertainty because the ideas are inspired by 10 years researching and living in the head of the Scottish philosopher David Hume. In the 18th century, Hume did something more successful in Western philosophy than even the Cartesian, who doubted everything but the I. Hume questioned the certainty of the I. In this podcast, the I is always in question, always in a state of flux, because it gives up the presumption of knowing with certainty who we truly are. At its core, embracing the uncertainty of knowing even the I, or the you, is what creates the opportunity to bring discovery and wonder, not just to an uncertain world, but to what we most take for granted. There is no getting away from the fact that this is an extraordinary time. And in this extraordinary time, it felt pertinent to change my original plan for what this episode was going to be. Originally, I'd planned to release an episode around the language of mental health. But when I looked through what I'd already recorded, what spoke to me, and what I hope speaks to you, is this episode around leadership. And so that's what I've chosen to share with you. Do you know that expression that once you see something, you cannot unsee it? That expression has a deep resonance for me. And I'm going to explain why. So I spent 16 years of my adult life studying and researching philosophy. And I spent the last 10 years of my life looking at what it is to be human and how that relates to the inner workings of the mind, how the inner workings of the mind relate to the way we make judgments, the way we form beliefs, the way we create understandings of duties and obligation, the way we understand what it is to have a right, the way we understand what it is for someone to have authority or to lose authority, what it is for political institutions to be governed by interest. I was looking at all of this rich complexity of history and philosophy and data and intuition and imagination. But for the first 8 years, there was a core message which I saw, and it was not an inspiring one. I would write about the cyclical nature of politics, the interest-driven aspect of politics, and the way history had kept repeating itself in terms of we hadn't learnt from the mistakes we'd made from the past. Instead, what we found is these patterns where we constantly got back into the same kinds of mistakes. Now, I said that was the first 8 years. The last 2.5 years, that changed. Now, and I want to be very clear that it didn't change in terms of the reality of the situation outside, in terms of what was going on in politics, what was going on in law. But what changed is my perception of what was possible. What changed was my perception of what is possible for human beings. I no longer was willing to tolerate a dialogue which said, this is just the way it's going to be given our imperfections. Instead, I wanted to come from a different place. In spite of our imperfections, we are capable of so much more. That is the inspiring message that I want to shift people into. We have our imperfections. Yes, we will always be human. There is no panacea of the soul. Doesn't matter how much self-development you do. That aspect of being human will always remain. And that's great. That is amazing. We do not want to lose that. We shouldn't strive to lose that. We shouldn't strive to be these perfect beings, these omniscient, perfect beings, we wouldn't be able to be relatable to the people in our world if that was the case. So, what am I driving at here? Well, what I'm driving at is we have our picture, our interpretation of what's going on in the political, the legal landscape, people's moral compass, whether it's, off or not off based on our own judgments and perceptions. And all of that is just an interpretation of what's going on in the world. And other people have different interpretations of what's going on in the world, and they think this is perfect, other people think we couldn't be living in a worse time. There is such a rich tapestry of interpretation. What remains constant is the presence of human beings. What remains constant is the presence of imperfection within how we show up in the world, and the fact that as human beings, we make mistakes, we disappoint one another over time, and we are capable of the most incredible moments of joy, the incredible aha moments where we literally shift in what is possible for us. You have that realization. And when you have that realization, you cannot unsee it. You may not always act from it, but you cannot unsee it. Because once you've seen it, it's literally becomes part of your knowledge. Right? As humans, we're constantly striving to have more knowledge. And yet, as we are aware, especially people who have read work in personal development and self-help, is that it's often called shelf-help. It's often called shelf-help instead of self-help because we don't actually actualize most of what is being described or written. We use it as a motivational tool, but it doesn't have the impact in terms of how we go about our lives from a day-to-day perspective. We put it in the category maybe of it just being too difficult to achieve. So we read it, we feel like we've absorbed its insights, and then that's enough. Now this is something I've done a lot of work on, the notion of insights. And when you look at the coaching sphere is about insights, generally speaking. And yet we also talk about it in terms of transformation. But transformation does not come from an insight. Transformation does not come from an insight. That may sound bizarre to say, but once you've experienced something deeper than insight, you realize it cannot be insight which creates the transformation. It's the action that you take around the insight which creates a transformation or has the possibility of creating a transformation in your world. It can create a transformation in the way you see others, the way you see your parents, the way you see your siblings, the way you see your boss. But if you don't do anything with that, it's just an insight. It becomes the same as a feeling. It becomes temporary. It doesn't have a permanence. It doesn't shape your world in a new way. It just literally lives as, oh, I realized this thing and I did nothing about it. Great. You realize this thing. And why am I sharing this? Well, I'm sharing this because I don't want you to make the same mistakes that I did. There was a long period of time where I was getting these fantastic insights. Oh my God, I had this view of the world and I didn't want to be a leader because I thought leadership was to do with being authority. And now I want to be a leader. Yeah, great, you want to be a leader. But what was I actually doing about it? What was I doing to step into that? And that was where there was the gap for a long time. I wasn't moving from what I could see was possible to actually creating it. So it actually was actualized. The possibility remained just that, a possibility. But possibility doesn't have to be something which just remains in the realm of insight. Possibility becomes transformative once we actually seek to take action around that. So what stops people from taking action? Given that they have these insights. And dare say, a lot of different books in self-development give people insights. Well, I think there are a few things. One would just be like, we absorb so much information in our lives that this just becomes another thing which we've absorbed. but we don't fully take on. We're in such a rush to get through things, rush to get to the end of it, that we're just looking to extract an insight rather than discovering something, discovering what there is to discover for ourselves if we've actually put that insight into practice. Right? So what did it look like for me? Well, for me, it actually meant opening up my voice. Opening up my mouth and speaking. Now that might seem like a really small action, but there is so much research about how great leaders are not born in a moment, generally speaking. There's the ripple effect of taking small actions. Leadership is about this build-up of small actions, which then ripple to something much larger, to something which is seen then in the world as inspiring. The first time Martin Luther King opened his mouth, and probably stood into being a leader, he didn't say, "I have a dream." Or at least he didn't say, "I have a dream" to thousands and thousands of people. That was something which was gained by observation and experience of the world and looking at how can he alter something about the way things were, the way things were going. But he wasn't born a leader. He stepped into leadership. He felt called to that, and he stepped into it. That is an incredibly important difference. Why is it an important difference? It's an important difference because it's easy to just have the narrative that I am not a leader, as if it is some natural thing, which when one was born, you were born a leader or you were not born a leader. You were just born. That's it. You were born, and then at times through life you made decisions. Some of those decisions were could have been around leadership. Some of them might not have been. The important thing is you were born, and then from there, you formed beliefs, opinions, observations, had experiences, which created the world and created your sense of self. And if you had had experiences which were commensurate with not believing that leadership was something which was possible for you, then the likelihood is you would not see a calling to step into leadership. I had grown up with an academic family where we were incredibly critical of the existing politics in Australia and around the world. I was inspired by the people who spoke as if they were leaders. And this was well before I'd even had any conception of the self-development or any of this transformative work or coaching or anything in that sphere. This was not in my vocabulary, let alone in my conscious. So the only examples of leadership were ones which I thought, I never want to be like them. I never want to be this power-hungry person who is making people's lives more challenging because what they're doing is acting in their own interest, in the guise of doing it for others. But that was just an interpretation. That wasn't a truth. If it was a truth, then it would be as if the word leader has a permanence as well in terms of what it constitutes, in terms of what it means. We get to reinvent these words. We get to mold them so that they fit for us. Why do I say that? Why is it important to mold words so that they fit for us? Because we don't want to have an excuse that it's not possible for us because we define something in such a way that we are ruled out of being capable of stepping into that definition that we have self-imposed or that society has self-imposed. Mold the language so that it fits your possibility. Don't allow the language to constrain what that possibility is. So I invite you to look in your life. Where is the language which you're utilizing in your life not fit for purpose, for the kind of person you actually striving to be, or actually desire to be, or actually see yourself deep down as? And if that language is not constraining you, then I invite you to do two things. I invite you to look bigger. I invite you to look if you really expanded your understanding or definition of leadership and what that would encompass for you. Or really expand your understanding of what it looks like to be an amazing communicator or to be a partner. What does that look like? What does partnership look like for you? Now, we're going to look at different ideas throughout this podcast, but I will continually bring language into the equation because language is such a pivotal cornerstone of how we construct our reality. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and please continue to share this with your community and friends and family. And if you are wanting to take this podcast to a deeper level, then my invitation to you is to reach out to me. You can reach out to me at Anchor directly, or you can also reach out to me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/The Philosophical Coach. There I'll be creating a group to support this podcast. This is for people like you who are fascinated about the nuances of what it is to be human. This is a group which is for people like you who already see the world this way or want to see the world this way. This is a group for people like you who know that being part of a community is what helps you thrive.